This is Learning the Instructions of God, Part 6. And I hope you have gone through all of them as we are continuing on learning the commandments that still apply to the average person today. And at the end of this series, you will find the final number. And we go according to verse. And there are 3 that have been removed. That is anything pertaining to the land of Israel, anything pertaining to the temple or temple processes, and biblical slavery that has also been removed, which is different from the slavery that we might remember in American history. It's very different. So let us continue on in our quest to learn God's instructions, because that is what Torah means, and we're going through the first 5 books of the Bible. Picking up from 155, we are in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 17, and this is dealing with not discriminating against people's cases, in which it states, "You shall not respect any persons in judgment, but you shall hear the small as well as the great. You shall not be afraid of the face of a man, for the judgment is God's, and the cause that is too hard for you, bring it unto me, and I will hear it." And this is pertaining to not being afraid of some man because he is very wealthy or very powerful. You are not to show favoritism, and you're not to pick on people because they're very poor and that their issues don't matter. All those matters are important to God, and justice and judgment is the proper thing to do. And also that you're not actually judging the person. God has already judged what is right or wrong, and you are just applying what God has determined to be the right course of action. Number 156, Deuteronomy chapter 4, and we need verse 15 so that we understand the commandment in 16. And this is dealing with idols. In verse 15, "Take careful heed to yourself, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire." So we're at Mount Sinai. They're saying, remember back. In verse 16, it says, "Lest you act corruptly and make yourselves carved images in the form of any figure, the likeness of male and female." So this is saying, do not carve yourselves any idols in the likeness of male and female. That's a particular point we need to know. We need to know that people make gods for male and female. You also might make idols of worship, famous celebrities you might worship. We're not to do that. Don't elevate people above you. Don't create fake gods in the form of man and female. Number 157, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 17. This is continuing on with idols, in which it states, "The likeness of any animal that is on earth, or the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air." So we're not to continue on making idols out of animals or birds, anything that's on the earth like that. You're not to create those things. Number 158, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 18. It's continuing on with idols, and we're getting more detail. So this one is the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, or a likeness of any fish that is in the water beneath the earth. And one of the examples of people violating this is they worship of Dagon, where they were worshiping a half man, half fish. Number 159, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19. This is idols again, and this is a warning about the heavens. It says, "Take heed lest you lift your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven, you feel driven to worship them and serve them, which Jehovah," that's Jehovah in English, "your God has given to all the peoples under the whole heaven as a heritage." So this is stating that you're not to worship the moon and the sun and the stars, which people do. If you go into learning occult history, that's all they do is they worship sun, moon, and stars. And you can find Satan behind the symbol of worshiping the sun gods, Babylonian sun gods. All of them are born on December 25th. And so that is when the sun is making its way back from being far away, or the earth is far away from the sun. And so that's considered the birthday of the sun. And that is found in all the occult groups around the world. All the sun god, Babylonian sun god worship came from the Tower of Babel. And that's why all these sun god people, they all end up sacrificing children and sacrificing people. We're not to do that. God is warning us. And also in this verse is stating that people will look up into the skies and they'll marvel and they'll want to worship the sun, moon, and stars. And that is why God is telling us not to, because he already knows people will want to do it. They'll marvel at the stars at night because they're so beautiful. But it is a sign of God's glory and everything that he's created. He stretched the heavens to their places, and it is to show how beautiful they are, how great God is, and how powerful he is. Number 160, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 7. This is idols again. You shall have no other gods before me. That is in the face of God. You shall not have any fake gods being worshipped in front of his face. It is detestable. Number 161, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 8, making idols. You shall not make yourself a carved image of any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Again, don't be making idols. Number 162, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 9, and we need 10 to help us out. It's do not worship idols, in which it states, you shall not bow down to them nor serve them. So don't create religions and do religious things and don't bow down and worship. For I, the Lord, that's Jehovah, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. This specific thing I want to point out there is God will show mercy to those who keeps his commandments. So we're to love him and keep his commandments. If you love him, you will keep his commandments. You'll do what he says to do. It's like a son to a father. If the son doesn't love the father, then he will not obey anything the father says. But if he loves him, he will do everything his father says to do. Number 163, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 11, using God's name in a lie, in which it states, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes the name in vain. And we've talked about that previously, when we talk about swearing falsely. The people in the past would make oaths and they would swear by God's name, but they would say things that were not true. And so we're not to do that. Number 164, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 12, observe the Sabbath. And this is a very important one to understand how to keep God's Sabbath. It talks about we are to remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And then here in Deuteronomy, we have a different word being used. This word is the word that means observe. And it's the combination of the two, observing and remembering, is how you keep it holy. And so this verse states, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. So it is a combination of practicing the Sabbath and also remembering it, never forgetting it. which is why you actually practice it, so that you don't forget. And it's also important to state that Jesus and all his disciples kept the Sabbath. Even after Jesus went to be at the right hand of the Father, all his disciples continued on keeping the Sabbath. Paul kept the Sabbath. Paul continued to keep the law. And it's not until the Roman Catholic Church that comes in do they start doing away with Sabbath keeping and making a great divide. And I have a great teaching on that. It is called What is the Sabbath? It is a 2-part series, and I highly recommend that because it is the full history on the Sabbath and what happened to it. And you will see information that is nowhere else on the internet. I have put everything in that series. And so please go check that out if you want to learn more about the Sabbath. Number 165, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 13. Work for 6 days. Now, this is part of the Sabbath information because people forget about this. We are to work 6 days. You shall labor and do all your work. So you're supposed to work 6 days. I don't care what it is, how it is. We live in modern times, so you got to figure that out for yourself. But you're supposed to be laboring 6 days, and on the 7th day, you're supposed to rest, because that's exactly what God did. He labored for 6 days in creation, and on the 7th day, he rolled back his sleeves and said, you know what? I'm going to rest now because everything I've done has done good. 166, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14, continuing on with the Sabbath. It states, but the 7th day is the Sabbath day of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. So if this looks familiar, again, this is the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. However, in this set of 10 Commandments, there are slight differences, little nuanced differences. And so it's important to keep these in as far as the overall count of the commandments found in the Torah. Number 167, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 15. Remember the slavery and the Sabbath, in which it states, and remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So there's 2 things here. You're supposed to keep the Sabbath, and you're also to remember that you were a part of people enslaved in Egypt. The 12 tribes, if you're a descendant from the 12 tribes, and even if you're not a descendant from the 12 tribes, you have assimilated with God's people, and you are now in the Israelite camp. You're part of the tribes. Doesn't matter which tribe you're on. Maybe later you can choose one, but if you're following Christ and you're following the God of the Bible, you have been assimilated into Egypt, into Israel, and you are to remember that you are part of people who were once enslaved. And of course, that's a metaphorical thing, being that you were slaves to sin and now you're free into the promised land. Number 168, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16, honoring parents. Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be long and that it may be well with you in the land which the Lord your God is giving to you. So I keep this in because it's talking about if you honor your parents, means you take care of your mother and father, they will have long lives. And that's what that verse is saying. You're supposed to take care of your parents. Number 169, Deuteronomy 5:17. This is murder. You shall not murder. And it's different from what people will memorize, in which they'll memorize, you shall not kill. The Bible does not restrict anything from killing. You can kill animals. If you're in warfare, you are to kill people. If you accidentally kill someone, there's a whole process for that. But murder is forbidden. Murder is intentional. It's purposeful of killing an innocent party. And so we're not to murder. And you can only do that to another human. Killing an animal is not murder. Number 170, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 18, adultery. You shall not commit adultery. Adultery is that there is a covenant made between a man and woman, and then the person sleeps with another person outside of their covenant. So it is a breaking of a covenant with your spouse by bringing in a third party. You're cheating. And so that is what adultery is. 171, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 19, stealing, you shall not steal. That's an obvious one. 172, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 20, lying. And there's a whole lot of verses on lying. I hope to someday do a teaching on lying. Lots and lots of verses. We're not to be lying. In which this one states, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So don't go and spread some kind of lie or testify in court or make up things about your neighbor. We're to love our neighbors. Number 173, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 21, wanting others' things, wanting, covenanting, in which the Bible states, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. The ox and donkey, those are utility things that he uses for his farm or his land, his nice tractor or anything like that. Don't be marveling and plotting and wanting, because it could lead you to stealing or murder or lying, any of that thing. It could be from you wanting. Number 174, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 32, straight path, which it states, therefore you shall be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. That means follow these commandments, and you shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. So God is saying you're to walk a straight and narrow path. You're to follow these commandments and stick to them. Don't be venturing off the path. You're supposed to look straight ahead and focus on these commandments and focus on God and what he has said to do. Number 175, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, to listen and to acknowledge the unity of God. And this is a great one. And this is the verse that Jewish people wish to say as their last dying breath. And it's the Shema. That's what it means. Shema means hear and obey. And so it states, hear, O Israel, Shema Israel, Yehovah, our God is one. So in Hebrew, it's Shema Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Yehovah is one. Number 176, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, love God. And this commandment is very important, in which it states, you shall love the Lord your God. You shall love Yehovah Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And so that is the most important commandment of all, to love God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Number 177, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7, teach your children. This is important. Why are we falling off the job and letting crazy schools mind control our children? We're supposed to teach them ourselves, in which this verse states, you shall teach them diligently to your children. That's teach these commandments to your children diligently. and shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. So you are to teach your children these commandments all the time. Just constantly be teaching them all the time these commandments, and then your children will not stray. Number 178, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 8, poetic commandment about the law. So we're going to look at this one. And this is a metaphorical thing that's being stated. The Bible is full of poetry and allegories and metaphorical things. And this is a commandment that instills a message, which states, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be on the frontlets between your eyes. And so this verse is not saying to get tattoos of the commandments on your forehead and on your arm. What this is stating is that you are to have the commandments in your mind, on your brain, in your memory bank, and they shall be on your arm, on your hand. That means in your actions, in your deeds. And the next one continues on the same way. Number 179, Deuteronomy chapter 6, 9. And it states, you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. This is metaphorically speaking. You are to have the commandments in your house and on your gates. And every dwelling place, you're supposed to act out those commandments. And your cities as well should be followers of these commandments. Now, if you want to get a mezuzah and put it on your doorpost, by all means, go ahead. But this is a metaphorical thing. Number 180, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 13. Fear God and use his name. We are to use the name of God. I have a teaching on how it became banned. It was banned by the Greeks and later by the Romans. And it was a means to preserve life because the Romans were going to kill the Jewish people for using God's name. And so they created sign languages, and then they used the word Lord in place of God's name. And so it is something we are supposed to be using. God uses his name 6,827 times in the Old Testament alone. And so this verse states, you shall fear the Lord your God and serve him, and you shall take oaths in his name. That means you are to use his name. Number 181, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 14, idols. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the peoples who are all around you. So just because you moved in somewhere doesn't mean you have to assimilate and start worshiping their gods. God is saying, don't do that. You're going to move into this land, and there's going to be idol worship everywhere, and you are to stay pure and don't follow them. And he's telling them this because he knows they will, and they did. Number 182, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 16, do not tempt God. You can't tempt God, but don't even try it. And so it states, you shall not tempt the Lord your God as you tempted him at Massah. Number 183, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 17, keep the commandments, in which it states, you shall diligently keep the commandments of Jehovah your God, his testimonies and his statutes, which he has commanded you. Keep the commandments. Number 184, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 24. And we need 25 for the clarity of this verse. And this is on be righteous by observing the commandments. It's a very important verse because people will say, well, God said for us to be righteous. How do we do that? Well, let's read what it says. In verse 24, it states, and the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. And here's the verse 25 that we need. Then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord our God as he has commanded us. So, therefore, if you keep his commandments, you are righteous. You are operating in the right fashion. And it is good for us to keep the commandments always. That is what this verse is stating. And it is good for us to fear him, because out of fear of disappointing our Father, it keeps us doing what is righteous. Number 185, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9, love him that keep the commandments, in which it states, therefore know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. And by the way, out of all of mankind, we still have not had 1,000 generations. So God is still true to his word. Number 186, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 11. Keep the commandments, in which it states, therefore you shall keep the commandment, the statute, and the judgments, which I have commanded you today, to observe them. He's talking to the Israelites, the 12 tribes, the people, the mixed multitudes at Mount Sinai, all of them, all those that have joined themselves to follow these people of the Bible, that if you love God, you shall keep the commandments. And so that is the last one of this part 6 series. I hope you join me for part 7, and we will find out in the next few how many commandments there are that apply to the average person. I'll say thank you for joining me. Please like, subscribe, and share this out to as many people as you can, because these commandments are very important. They really help you learn how to live in peace with God and in peace with your neighbor. All these are good for you. It's like a car manual. You don't know how to operate a car or to take care of your car unless you read the manual. You find out, oh, I'm supposed to change the oil. Oh, I'm supposed to put gas in it. I'm supposed to change the tire. I'm supposed to get new spark plugs. Well, that is what the Bible is. It tells you what you need to do to maintain a happy, healthy life. God loves you, and he has given you the answers to solve all your problems. And by the way, all of your problems are your problems. They're not other people's problems, and you have to fix them. And God can help you fix them. You just have to do something about it. So thank you so much for joining me, and God bless you all out there.